Hey Ryan, at what point did your father finally say, okay, I've had enough with this mess with the BLM and decide to exercise the rights that he had?
Okay, very well. Again, in the late 80s, we were getting to the point where we had had enough. But at that time, we still did not have the education that we needed because we didn't know any better. We assumed that the Bureau of Land Management did have the authority and that we had to sign the contracts and we had to pay the grazing fees. And it was never about the grazing fees. The fees were not that high. The fees were not really an issue. It was the control and the management practices that they were forcing us through that was driving us out of business that was the issue. Now, this was so stressful to my father that he became physically ill. Physically ill to the point that he was bedridden, he was on oxygen bottles, and he used a walker to get around in his early 40s. He looked like he was 95. It literally had driven him to a sick bed status, and he was in that condition for months, barely getting out of bed. Now, that was just from the stress of what was going on. Now, being that he was bedridden at that point, he did try to use that time to study and learn and try to understand because he knew that there was something wrong. He felt it, but he didn't know. He didn't understand. And so we signed the grazing fee or grazing contracts, the BLM contracts, and we did it. We did it under protest. We would sign it, but then we would add a letter of protest to it because we knew that it wasn't right, but we didn't know.
Under duress, it's called.
Under duress. So we wanted to make sure it was being signed under duress. Now, during that process of study, he began to read state law. He began to read the Constitution of the United States. He began to read in the Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo. He delved into the issue of rights, and that's where, like I said, state law about the rights. He began to try to understand what a bureaucracy was. Where did the bureaucracy come from? How did it fit into our proper form of government? He didn't even understand the proper form of government. He had to learn the proper form of government. What is the proper form of government? How did the proper form of government come to be? Who were our founding fathers? What did they give to us? They give to us a republican form of government, based, et cetera, et cetera. These things are not being taught in public school.
The public fool system.
The public fool system. These things are not being taught in school, and so my father, being a graduate of public school, didn't know these things. And the general public today still don't know these things. To graduate and pass through high school in the United States of America, we ought to really understand who we are, and yet we don't. And he came to an understanding and realized that the Bureau of Land Management does not have authority. He realized that the bureaucracies do not have authority, and he realized that the Constitution, they don't, through the Constitution, they don't have this authority, they don't own the land, et cetera, et cetera. All these things that we've been talking about and what this whole battle is about. And he also realized that the only way the Bureau of Land Management has authority over you is if you sign the contract with them. And so, I believe it was in I don't know the exact date he wrote the letter. It was early 90s. He finally wrote the letter and sent it to the Solicitor's Office of the United States. And he said, "Thank you for your services, considering the BLM. I no longer need your services.
Rescinding my contract."
Well, and we were smart enough not to sign long-term contracts, so we didn't have to rescind a contract. We simply didn't sign a new one. Oftentimes, the BLM these days have everyone sign 10-year contracts. Well, that's hard to get out of. We were only signing quarterly contracts, or at the most an annual contract. So within 1 year, we were out.
And even in with those contracts, you did not have to give up any rights.
Nope, we relinquished no rights.
Right.
So basically, from that point on, we continued our grazing operation, our ranch, based upon the grazing rights that we already owned, that already were protected by state law, that already existed. And we said, we will manage our own range. We do not need the services of an outside influence to manage and tell us when and where and how and what we could graze. We manage our own ranch. So if we're not hiring a service, we're not going to pay the service. Okay? And we will pay for our own improvements. If we need a range improvement, then we'll not ask for money from any grazing board. We will simply fund that improvement on our own.
So when you hear the mainstream media and other people comment and say, well, I have to pay taxes and he should have to pay fees, that kind of thing, you're saying that you don't have to pay the fees because you're not getting any service from them.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
There's no and everything we do with the government that gives them rights over us is all done by contract. It's done surreptitiously. I mean, when you get your driver's license or register your car, it's all nonsense.
So the BLM says we want you to pay these fees, and for what? They were just saying just so they can maintain their administration capabilities, but you don't need anything from them. So why pay the fees?
They weren't providing the service
And
any longer.
they weren't providing the service that they were contracted to provide anyway. They were contracted to provide a valuable service, not a devaluable service. Okay, so they were not providing anything at all other than problems. All right, if you own a business and you hire a consulting company, and that consulting company, through their advice or through whatever you hired them to do, causes your business to lose money, are you going to hire them and sign a new contract with them? No, you're not. Okay, and that's exactly what was going on with the Bureau of Land Management. Their services were purposely, intentionally causing us and other ranchers to lose money, to lose their businesses, and we didn't need that type of consultation.
So at some point, did they sue you, or did they obviously took you to court, or they did something? Kind
Sure,
of describe that.
Okay.
Okay, before you go there for a second, I want to know why didn't why didn't the ranchers band together at that point, the remaining ones? What did they?
Well, no. Again, because too many ranchers were complacent. Again, they hadn't received the education that my father had received. They believed that the BLM was in authority. Also, because of farm subsidies, that so many ranchers or farmers, were receiving money from the government, and by going against what the government says, they're going to lose those subsidies. Again, money controls, and part of that was those range improvements. Ranchers didn't believe that they can handle their own range improvements because they are expensive at times, and so they, it's through fear and ignorance.
But did the BLM actually help them out? I mean, it seems like at that point the BLM was interested in getting rid of them.
Well, and here's the other thing. They have attacked ranchers in areas, like at that time they were attacking the ranchers across the Mojave Desert. Clark County, pretty much covered by Mojave Desert. Southern California, a little bit into Arizona, a little bit into southern Utah, but primarily southern Nevada and southern California. And so they were hitting that area. Once they've had us cleaned out, then they move to another area. And so they kind of strike in small locations, keeping the others appeased until they have the proper timing to strike them. And so again, most people aren't concerned about such things until it affects their own pocketbook, and by then they've already wiped the others out in the other areas, and so it's hard for anyone to band together because they're not being attacked at the same time.
Okay, so how did the BLM took you to court, or did they sue you, or how did they? What did they do?
Sure, they used they sued us, you know, again in federal court, you know, based upon their codes, upon federal codes again. And this is back to where I said, you know, now you've got a federal code that they're coming at you with, and what's the federal judge going to do? Okay,
Yeah.
and in our case, the federal judge did not recognize state law that protects range rights. He did not recognize brand laws. It did not recognize our rights. Okay, and he strictly bases his decisions and his case based upon federal code, which again, federal code is not law. And so their judgments against us was completely biased instead of unbiased. They were completely biased. In fact, when we brought up the issues of our rights upon land ownership that doesn't belong to the federal government, upon, you know, water rights, grazing rights, upon state law, the judge said these were moot. And he used that term moot, M-O-O-T. Now, if you look up at the definition of moot, it says does not merit consideration. Okay, so here we have our rights that were established before this land even belonged to the United States, was recognized through treaties that brought this land into the United States, was recognized by the states after it was brought in as a state, and the federal judge says they're moot. They're not worthy of consideration. You know, let me tell you about the worthy of consideration. These range rights are real to the point that banks consider them for collateral. They will borrow and upon these rights. They're bought and sold as real property through real estate agents that deal in those type of transactions. They don't necessarily have the paperwork attached to them that other properties and stuff have, like deeds and titles. But yet they're still real, and realtors and banks and financial institutions give them merit and credit.
Can you speculate at all why you think the BLM wants to do this, wants ranchers out of here?
You know, again, speculation, but you know, environmental reasons, which I think 99% of environmentalism is fraud. That environmentalism is pretty much a ruse with underlying reasons. You know, that they use the such as the desert tortoise. You know, why they really want control. I think they want control of the land. Why they want control of the land, I don't know, but they want control of the land. You know, I don't think the environmental reasons are real or right at all.